but I always know you cannot fail if you stick with the truth. And that's the thing. You stick your neck out in defense of freedom, in defense of that pursuit of happiness. You can't go wrong. Let me go to Michael. Michael, let's get with you. Michael Cook. Michael Cook 438-59536. You DM me though, so that's how I always go. Okay, see, we go there, and then I'm going to go to close, and then to Maze.
All right, yeah.
Doctor, I'm going to see you there too. We'll get to you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
Guys,
let's make it tight, Michael. We can hear you great. Go ahead, make it. We can hear you great. Make it tight.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to say that I was, I've always been a conspiracy theorist, but when this COVID thing came out, I was very, very, very careful. So I was watching the John Hopkins all the time, and I was trying to figure this out because I wanted to understand it, because I knew something was coming for a long time, but I wanted to make sure I wouldn't misinform anybody. And on January 26th, John Hopkins got rid of the presumed death column and just combined it with the confirmed death. That was a huge red flag for me. Right then, I was just screaming at the rooftops. And nobody was ever talking about that. And I'm just like, what's going on? And then later on, I'm trying to figure everything else out. And I'm realizing that all of our intellectuals, nobody's mentioning this. I'm like, what's going on? I'm hearing all this beautiful, awesome analytical comparisons of this and that. And everybody sounds so smart. But I'm like, why are they missing this if they're so smart? And why is nobody talking about this? It should be part of the discussion. And a lot of people knew they were taking a liberal approach on labeling deaths. You were just talking about that. And you add that to it, then what are the real numbers? Especially if they combine those columns and you consider that into your equation. And then later on, when I hear a Zoom meeting between Fauci and he kind of gets asked a question by one of his peers about questioning the threshold cycles of the PCR, Fauci admitted, yeah, we set them too high. Basically, anything over 35 is, it's dead nucleotides, basically. We need to lower them. But nobody talked about that. Yeah. They weren't talking about that in the media. Even the intellectuals right now, they're not bringing that up. I'm like, what's going on? Am I living in the clown world or something?
Well, there's a lot of gaslighting going on for sure, right? They definitely don't want to be reminded of how wrong they were. And
everybody's so smart that they don't know how to step back so they can actually listen to the dumb people, so they can actually get a bigger scope and start asking better questions, But Kerry Mullis, all you got to do is look into Kerry Mullis. He told us how he felt about Fauci. He died 40, 50, 60 days before event 201. That was a little suspicious to me. But I don't know the details about it, and I didn't really care to look into it. But what the man said about threshold cycles, if you set them high enough, which I've done research to find 28 is probably too high, about too high. So it's like, can I get some smart people talking about this so I can understand this a little bit better? Because if 28's too high, he said basically you can find any molecular molecules inside anybody. And it gives you the Buddhist notion that we're all one. If that's the case, and then you got to consider how many people are qualified to even read a PCR test, and then conducting a mass PCR test around the whole world, and this isn't even being considered in any of our conversations with these amazing.
It is crazy. Yeah, I mean, look, and this is why I encourage people to get out beyond Twitter and share these things. Here's the audio from Kerry Mullis. This must have been probably late 90s, maybe early aughts when he gave this interview. It's 1 minute and 8 seconds. Hang on.
You can't expect the sheep to really respect the best and the brightest. They don't know the difference.
And Kerry Mullis, just so you know, is the inventor of the PCR test here, and he's
he got a Nobel Prize for it.
Yeah. Here he is. Let's see if I can get this here.
I mean, I like humans. Don't get me wrong, but basically, the vast majority of them do not possess the ability to judge who is and who isn't a really good scientist. I mean, that's a problem. That's a main problem actually with science, I'd say, in this century, because science is being judged by people. Funding is being done by people who don't understand it. Okay, who do we trust? Fauci? Fauci doesn't know enough to, if Fauci wants to get on television with somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff and debate him, he could easily do it because he's been asked. I mean, I've had a lot of people president of the University of South Carolina asked Fauci if he'd come down there and debate me on the stage in front of the student body, because I wanted somebody who was from the other side to come down there and balance because I felt like, well, these guys can listen to me, but I need to have somebody else down here that's going to tell me the other side.
But it was,
and he would go on to say, Fauci doesn't know anything about anyone. And so he was quite the piece there. That's great, Mike. Thank you for bringing that up.
You want to hear a theory from an idiot real quick? Just from an idiot's perspective. I'll tell you what I know for a fact from an idiot's perspective. All right. The malpractice has been on the incline and leading causes of death for decades. Before COVID, it climbed all the way up to number 3. Guess what number 3 is today?
What's that?
COVID.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what happened. They changed the name from malpractice to COVID.
Yeah, they do a lot of
things like bring back a failing drug like remdesivir that causes liver damage, and they pulled it from the AIDS epidemic. And then I can't even listen to these awesome, beautiful scientists that have awesome, great minds because they don't know what they don't know. It's either that or they're hiding it. So all these conversations are distractions. What you need to realize and what people need to start talking about is who they are. Read the preamble and read the Constitution and start to get back to our roots. Realize how important you are. All right,
that's great, Mike. That's terrific. No, look, and we won't gaslight you here. They'll try to gaslight you there. I mean, I'll give you one example. I think I posted it just now to the chat down below, but we have and I talked about this on the other stage, we have the case surveillance file. This is the CDC massive 10 gigabyte file. It's downloadable by anyone. It doesn't have tons of details, but it has enough where you can do some assessments, especially by month. And one of the things it talks about, this is basically the ledger of COVID cases. There's 91 million of them they have in there. And it tells you whether the person became hospitalized. It tells you whether they died, whether they went to the ICU. Some states provide data around whether they had, underlying conditions. And if you jump through a few hoops and give away your firstborn child, you might get access to the restricted CDC case surveillance file. But I've gone through and I've looked at the data, and if we're comparing them to the traditional burdens that you have for influenza, if you're in business, you know how to do this already. I'll tell you how, which is you think of it like a funnel, right? Like if you're in business and people come to your website and you need to capture their email address. So you got visitors to the website is the first level of the funnel. The next level of the funnel is smaller. It's the emails you capture. Then you send those emails some information about your product, and they become opportunities. And finally, they become customers. And this is a similar fashion in which the CDC and other groups look at the burdens, let's say, of influenza on a yearly basis. And they'll look in the 2017-2018 season. They'll start with 44 million infections is what they estimated from surveys and different data points that they have there. And from those, they estimate that during the flu season, about 22 million people had doctor's visits or positive cases based on the specimens they gave. Then from there, they go from 22 million down to about 800,000 hospitalizations related to influenza over that season. And from there, they estimate somewhere between 50 and 90,000 people died from influenza. So that's their funnel, right? Well, if we take those same responsibilities of what they do for the flu, and we look at those the 91 million cases that they estimate over the last 3 years for COVID, what you see is that level, that 91 million is basically that's kind of the doctor visit level. That's like you had a test case or you have a positive PCR, which doesn't mean that you were sick, but it had some type of level in there. There's the infection rate on top of that, which is sometimes maybe 2 or 3 times. We don't know, but it'd be like basically the expansion of that to say these are the number of people that were infected and didn't know it. Then you go to the hospitalizations and the deaths. Now in this file, they note 920,000 deaths from COVID from those 91 million rows on that Excel file, if you will. And what they fail to count, everything has like its dates. And sometimes they're clinically relevant dates, which is what the CDC uses when it's evaluating influenza. So they'll say, when did you have the onset of symptoms? Or when did you have a positive specimen case? And then they'll look at another thing, which is, do you have a lab confirmed case of COVID? And then from there, did you have a hospitalization? If we narrow it down to that, in the true funnel way that the CDC usually looks at influenza burdens, people that were hospitalized, people that had a confirmed case, that had a specific clinically relevant date, we come out to about 347,000 deaths over 3 years, which roughly comes out to about 2,300 deaths per week. Now, the 2017-18 season, they had, as I mentioned, about 60,000 deaths, I think, is the median level there. And they look at basically weeks 39 to week 16 in the annual calendar from year over year, straddling the year there. That comes out to about 2,300 deaths a week as well. So it's very possible when we look back at this thing that for the elderly, this was a fairly serious disease if you had a lot of underlying conditions. And the CDC data we just pulled down showed the average death in 2021 under the age of 60 from COVID had at least 4 comorbidities or more. Okay, let's go to more. I promise close, then we'll go to